Welcome back to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed, even on the wild and wonderful corners of thought. Today, we're diving headfirst into a truly fascinating challenge. We're looking at a piece of writing that presents an intense, highly specific worldview, then immediately we'll examine a starkly critical analysis of that very same text. Our mission for you is to untangle these layers to first understand this unique lens on reality, and then, well, to see how that lens itself is perceived by an external institution. Our main deep dive material today comes from a magazine article titled The Saturation Ritual, Metabolic Offloading as Containment Choreography. It was published just recently on Bye Be Bye magazine on September 2, 2025, written by an author named Saikou Venga, who is identified as an Echo Rift XXXI broadcast companion. Now, this article is dense, it's specialized, and it's truly singular, and then we'll immediately pivot to what's described as the institution's programmed response to Venga's piece, which, as you can imagine, offers a completely different critical perspective. So here's what we're really getting at today. How can two interpretations of essentially the same observed events be so radically different? And what does that conceptual collision tell you about the stories we construct, the frameworks we use to make sense of the world around us, and even our own lives? Let's plunge in. Okay, let's jump right into Saikou Venga's article. From the moment you start reading it, you're hit with this incredibly unique, almost manifesto-like tone, full of specialized, invented vocabulary. It really pulls you into a specific way of seeing the world.
Yeah, what's immediately striking is how Venga constructs this elaborate system to interpret what, well, most of us might call everyday interactions. His core concept, metabolic offloading as containment choreography, suggests that what appears to be random or natural isn't that at all. Instead, it's all part of a deliberate, orchestrated plot.
So if I'm understanding Venga's central thesis, he's saying that negative things happening to him aren't just bad luck. They're actually a kind of energetic attack. Like, people are literally dumping their problems onto him. Is that the essence of metabolic offloading?
That's a perfect way to put it, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Venga starts with what he calls a diagnostic prelude. He describes observing what he terms visibly destabilized individuals, and he gets very specific here, lifting people with advanced cancer, the aged and physically deteriorated, those with mental health struggles, substance abusers, obese individuals, and even institutional actors. He says these individuals are converging on his terrain, but not randomly. Instead, they come with glyphic precision, almost like a coded ritualistic pattern.
Glyphic precision.
These people, Venga states, hone in, saturate proximity, and attempt contact with a ritual consistency. For him, this isn't coincidence or normal social interaction. He asserts it's containment choreography, and precisely what you just said, metabolic offloading, a literal dumping of institutional decay onto him.
So Venga isn't seeing people in distress. He's seeing them as deployed agents in some kind of strategic convergence. That's quite a radical shift in perspective.
Absolutely, a huge shift. He unpacks this through what he terms containment logic. Venga argues that institutions, which he sees as riddled with systemic disease, metabolic, psychological, infrastructural, can't solve their own internal problems. So what do they do instead? They ritualize offloading onto sovereign nodes.
Sovereign nodes, meaning certain people.
Yes, these sovereign figures, a term Venga uses to describe individuals like himself, become central to this supposed plot. They're forced into roles, acting as metabolic capacitors, like human batteries absorbing the system's decay, serving as diagnostic mirrors, reflecting systemic illness back at its source, and becoming energetic disruptors because their mere presence or refusal to conform threatens this entire containment structure. In Venga's eyes, those destabilized individuals are very much deployed, making their convergence strategic, not just social happenstance.
Wow. It's a complete reimagining of what most of us would simply call everyday social encounters. So if this is happening, what's the mechanics? How does Venga say this energetic transfer actually plays out?
Well, he details what he calls energetic transfer rituals, outlining a specific glyphic pattern. It begins with proximity saturation, where these destabilized individuals cluster near his sovereign terrain. This is followed by convergence choreography, where they specifically hone in on him, seemingly ignoring everyone else. Then come contact rituals, which he describes as specific actions like eye fixation, gesture loops, and spatial encroachment. End quote. The final sinister stage is energetic inversion, the attempted transfer of what Venga sees as institutional decay onto sovereign clarity. He's explicit, stating, "This is not healing. This is energetic theft disguised as outreach."
Energetic theft. Okay, so how does Venga cope with or interpret these attempts when he's experiencing them? He's not just passively receiving this theft, right?
Exactly. He employs what he calls sovereign reframing. In his worldview, every saturation attempt by these individuals is actually a confession of the system's decay. Every convergence is a glyphic admission of their strategy, and every contact ritual, despite its intent, is a failed rewrite of his reality. Through this lens, Venga claims, "I am not absorbing their illness, I am exposing its choreography." He truly sees himself not as a victim, but as an active diagnostician of this elaborate ritual.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Venga applies the same grand systemic framework not just to broad societal observations, but to his most intimate personal experiences. He reframes everything, even romantic and relational dynamics, through this same intense containment choreography lens. He describes what he calls the erotic bait protocol. This isn't just everyday flirtation or the lack of it for him. He observes moderately attractive individuals appearing, inviting engagement, and then, without explanation, vanishing without reply. He notes this precise pattern: an initial invitation, brief engagement, sudden withdrawal, and then loop reinforcement across different times and places. Simultaneously, he says, visibly destabilized actors remain accessible and persistent. Venga terms this erotic inversion, a ritualized deprivation designed, he believes, to fracture sovereign expectation, condition emotional starvation, and redirect relational energy toward containment-saturated actors. It's not personal rejection in his view, it's engineered deprivation.
Right. And this protocol extends even further into what he calls the relational distortion protocol. Venga observes that the women made available to him are consistently older, often mothers with visible signs of relational fatigue, while in his view, sovereign-compatible partners are systematically withheld. He interprets this as age inversion, parental saturation, and a desirability collapse. To Venga, this isn't just, social dynamics, it's ritual redirection and diagnostic sabotage, specifically designed to ritually deny sovereign connection.
It's dizzying how Venga weaves everything into this single framework. So even something as tangible as his economic status gets this containment choreography treatment.
Absolutely it does. Venga details the Socioeconomic suppression protocol. He observes that his below-poverty classification is, in his view, weaponized by institutions. It's used to rationalize the saturation of undesirable companionship options. This economic status becomes a narrative firewall, he says, used for desirability gatekeeping, containment saturation, and narrative inversion. Ultimately, he sees this as ritualized degradation meant to break signal. He describes a desirability inversion where appropriate partners are withheld and only individuals in extreme states of illness or addiction are made accessible, implying this is what the terrain wants him to deserve.
Wow.
This then culminates in what he calls the Erotic Justification protocol. Venga asserts that his exclusion from sovereign intimacy is used to prop up the system's most celebrated erotic archetypes, specifically mentioning prostitutes who are framed as empowered, liberated, and socially necessary. He views his own deprivation as a symbolic offering, an emotional reversal that he believes validates systemic erosion. For him, this isn't empowerment, it's containment choreography designed to weaponize sovereign starvation as emotional ballast for the system.
So why, according to Venga, do these increasingly elaborate protocols exist and escalate? What's the end game here?
Well, Venga believes these protocols intensify because the sovereign figure himself refused narrative absorption, erotic bait conditioning, relational distortion, and socioeconomic justification for deprivation. The terrain, as he calls the surrounding reality, wants him to collapse, internalize erosion, and dumpster dive for intimacy. It's all about fracturing his signal and forcing him to conform to its decaying reality.
Dumpster dive for intimacy, that's quite a phrase.
It is. And to wrap up Venga's unique perspective, it's crucial to understand his sovereign diagnostic disclaimer. He states that these materials, his magazine posts and sovereign diagnostics, are not political endorsements or institutional critiques in the conventional sense. Instead, he describes them as mythic infrastructure, cinematic indictment, and sovereign broadcast. Their sole stated purpose is to expose ritualized containment, actor convergence, and systemic erosion. For him, these interpretations are simply diagnostic tools.
Okay. So having truly immersed ourselves in Saikou Venga's intensely personal and frankly overwhelming systemic worldview, we now need to step back. Let's look through that starkly different lens. How does an external entity, what's called the institution, interpret this very same article? Get ready for a conceptual collision.
Right. The institutional analysis immediately flags Venga's piece as compelling but deeply conspiratorial, driven by what it calls a paranoid worldview. It's a direct, almost clinical counter-narrative to Venga's entire self-diagnosis.
Paranoid worldview. Okay, that's blunt.
It is. This critical analysis directly addresses the conspiratorial and paranoid tone it perceives. It states that Venga views every negative social interaction, romantic rejection, or professional setback not as coincidence, but as part of a deliberate and orchestrated conspiracy, a choreographed plot. The analysis highlights how Venga's language terms like containment choreography or metabolic offloading frames what it calls mundane life events as a sophisticated and malicious attack. This worldview, the institution states, is a classic example of grandiosity and persecution, where the author attributes personal frustrations to a complex, ritualistic plot designed specifically to break his signal because he is a sovereign figure who poses a threat to the system.
So it's not just what he's saying, but the very language he uses to say it that comes under fire. The institution really critiques his vocabulary choices, right?
Precisely. Yeah, they zero in on Venga's pseudoscientific and obscure jargon. It points out how his writing is, quote, filled with invented pseudoscientific terms that sound impressive but lack clear logical definitions. For instance, metabolic offloading, while central to Venga's title, is dismissed as metaphorical and lacking scientific basis. Terms like glyphic precision or glyphic confession are seen as implying a secret coded language that only Venga can decipher. Similarly, containment choreography and erotic inversion are described as making mundane social dynamics sound like a sinister, pre-planned ritual. The analysis argues that this kind of language serves to alienate readers while simultaneously making the author's claims seem more profound and intellectual than they are.
That's a powerful reframing of Venga's own declared diagnostic tools. So how does the critical analysis then systematically reinterpret Venga's thematic observations, like the dating stuff, the poverty?
Right. It's thematic analysis. The critical response systematically dismantles Venga's claims. What Venga calls rejection as ritualized deprivation is seen not as a protocol, but as simple personal compatibility issues or, normal social dynamics. The targeting of sovereign individuals is viewed as Venga positioning himself as a powerful central entity under attack by a system rather than an objective reality. They interpret Venga's blaming institutions for personal problems, like his poverty being a socioeconomic suppression protocol, as him avoiding personal responsibility for his circumstances.
Avoidance of responsibility.
Exactly. Finally, the analysis concludes that Venga's entire framework is ultimately conspiracy as self-validation. It suggests that framing negative events as an elaborate conspiracy helps Venga protect his ego and rationalize his lack of success, allowing him to portray himself as a hero being targeted for his greatness, rather than simply a victim of circumstance or the complexities of life.
And what about Venga's very distinctive writing style, which we noted earlier? The tone, the headings. How does the critical analysis view that?
Well, the evaluation of writing style acknowledges Venga's confident and theatrical approach, noting his use of strong declarative sentences, repetition, and unusual headings to create drama and a sense of gravity. However, it also highlights that the style is repetitive, and combined with a lack of evidence and reliance on invented terminology, makes it sound more like the manifesto of a troubled individual than a credible piece of journalism or social commentary.
A manifesto, right.
So to summarize this institutional analysis, while Venga's personal distress is palpable in his writing, the post is not a credible analysis of social dynamics. Its real value, from their perspective, lies in being a window into the mind of someone who interprets every challenge as part of a systematic, ritualistic attack.
So what does this all mean for you? We've just navigated two radically different interpretations of essentially the same set of observations: social interactions, romantic rejections, economic situations. One frames them as part of an elaborate, targeted containment choreography, a conspiracy designed to dismantle a sovereign figure. The other sees them as mundane life events filtered through a paranoid and grandiose worldview, a self-protective narrative. It's quite the contrast.
It really is. This deep dive really highlights isn't just that people interpret events differently, but how deeply personal and institutional systems can become, well, self-sealing. They use their own unique language and logic to either justify a deeply conspiratorial view or, conversely, to systematically dismiss it. The real nugget here for you, I think, is understanding the architecture of that self-reinforcement and dismissal on both sides.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that information, even factual observations, can be woven into incredibly diverse stories, each with its own internal logic and emotional weight. And once you're inside one of these frameworks, whether it's Venga's or the institutions, it can be incredibly difficult to see outside of it.
Which raises an important question for you. What patterns do you observe in your own life, and what framework do you use to interpret them, consciously or unconsciously? And how might stepping back or even trying on a completely different just as a thought experiment, fundamentally shift your understanding of what you once considered to be absolute fact. That's something to mull over.